Hello. So, sorry about this. I am like 15 minutes behind my schedule. I had trouble setting this up. First streams, am I right? Anyways, hi, welcome. I'm Jade Fish, and whether you're here live or drifting in from the VOD later, I'm really glad you're here. This little corner of the ocean is for quiet comfort, public domain stories, and soft morning focus. Today we're starting with some original Grimm's fairy tales. I like reading, and I wanted to carve out a bit of my time reading without feeling like I'm not being productive. So here we are. I always want to read the classics because they feel timeless and a little strange and sometimes even dark. So with them being copyright free, I don't have to worry about being sued, which is always a plus. The plan for today is a short, cozy chat to start, about an hour reading today, and then we'll gently wrap it up together. If you're studying or working while listening, you're very welcome to drift along quietly. So, I always find it interesting how Brothers Grimm stories are so much darker than the Disney versions. Because to me, Brothers Grimm were more like folk tales, warnings, scary stories, disguised as bedtime stories. Like how in the original, what was it called? Red Riding Hood, the little red was eaten and had to. And it's a lot more graphic than my childhood picture books were. At least that's what I remember. But I'm not really good at memory. So I plan to go back to it at one point. Maybe today? Hopefully today. I also like classic literature because it's good to see how different it is. Today, most of the books I read are a little more about melodrama, about high school kids who are going to parties, getting cheated on, stuff like that, because that's what's popular to write about these days. But I always wanted to go back to the classics to have a little more variety, a little back to basics, I guess. I like doing morning streams because it's when nobody's home. I'm pretty nervous and a little shy, and I don't want to do this with my family around because, well, for one, they wouldn't understand. Because, again, streaming wasn't part of their generation, and my little brother, will completely make fun of me for this. He'll be like, oh my god, you're streaming? What the heck? And I'll be so embarrassed. And as for why I'm doing these reading streams outside of my love for reading, I just wanted to do something cute and cozy, if you know. Just something I can do, carve out a little time, kick back, read, and hopefully make things a little less stressful for people. Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying when I'm going to read during this reading stream, I'm going to focus mainly on the text. I might pause between stories to check in or give my opinions if I feel like I have something to say, but this is meant to be a calm listening space. So feel free to relax, study, or just drift. Okay, so on my list, I wanted to read a total of 3 stories, 4 if we have time, which I doubt because of my tech struggles. Okay, first I want to do Briar I want to do Briar Rose, which is also Sleeping Beauty. And then after that, Rapunzel. And then after that, Hansel and Gretel. If we have time, I'll do Little Red Cap or Little Red Riding Hood. Sound good? Thank you. Let's just move myself over a little bit. And fix. Just to make it a little bigger. That seems about right. So, alright, let's begin. This is Briar Rose from the original Brothers Grimm collection. A king and queen once upon a time reigned a country with a great deal... Sorry, my bad. Should have checked this out before I started streaming. A king and queen once upon a time reigned in a country a great way off, where there were in those days fairies. Now this king and queen had plenty of money, and plenty of fine clothes to wear, and plenty of good things to eat and drink, and a coach to ride out every day. But though they have been married for many years, they had no children, and this grieved them very much indeed. But one day, as the queen was walking by the side of the river, at the bottom of the garden, she saw a poor little fish. Oh, maybe me? Maybe me? No. That had thrown itself out of the water and lay gasping and nearly dead on the bank. Then the queen took pity on the little fish and threw it back again into the river. And before it swam away, it lifted its head out of the water and said, I know what your wish is, and it shall be fulfilled. In return for your kindness to me, you will soon have a daughter. What the little fish had foretold soon came to pass, and the queen had a little girl, so very beautiful that the king could not cease looking on it for joy, and said he would hold a great feast and make merry, and show the child to all the land. He asked his kinsmen and noblemen, and friends and neighbors. But the queen said, I will have the fairies also, that they may be kind and good to our little daughter. Now there were 13 fairies in the kingdom. But as the king and queen had only 12 golden dishes for them to eat out of, they were forced to leave one of the fairies without asking her. So 12 fairies came, each with a high red cap on her head and red shoes with high heels on her feet, and a long white wand in her hand. And after the feast was over, they gathered round in a ring and gave all their best gifts to the little princess. One gave her goodness, another beauty, another riches, and so on till she had all that was good in the world. Just as the 11 of them had done blessing her, a great noise was heard in the courtyard, and word was brought that the 13th fairy was come, with a black cap on her head, and black shoes on her feet, and a broomstick in her hand. And presently up she came into the dining hall. Now, as she had not been asked to the feast, she was very angry, and scolded the king and queen very much, and set to work to take her revenge. So she cried out, The king's daughter shall, in her 15th year, be wounded by a spindle and fall down dead. Then the 12th fairy of the friendly fairies, who had not yet given her gift, came forward and said that the evil wish must be fulfilled, but that she could soften its mischief. So her gift was that the king's daughter, when the spindle wounded her, shall not really die, but shall only fall asleep for 100 years. However, the king hoped still to save his dear child altogether from the threatened evil. So he ordered that all the spindles in the kingdom should be brought up and burnt. But all the gifts of the first 11 fairies were in the meantime fulfilled. For the princess was so beautiful and well-behaved and good and wise that everyone who knew her loved her. It happened that on the very day she turned 15 years old, the king and queen were not home, and she was left alone in the palace. So she roved about by herself and looked at all the rooms and chambers till at last she came to an old tower to which there was a narrow staircase ending with a little door. In the little door was a golden key, and when she turned it, the door sprang open, and there sat an old lady spinning away very busily. "Why, how now, good mother," said the princess. "What are you doing there?" "Spinning," said the old lady, nodding her head, humming a tune, while butz went the wind wheel. "How prettily that little thing turns around," said the princess, and took the spindle and began to try to spin. But scarcely had she touched it before the fairy's prophecy was fulfilled. The spindle wounded her, and she fell down lifeless on the ground. However, she was not dead, but had only fallen into a deep sleep. And the king and the queen, who had just come home, and all the court, fell asleep too. The horses slept in the stables, the dogs in the court, the pigeons on the housetop, and the very flies slept upon the walls. Even the fire of the hearth left off blazing and went to sleep. The jack stopped, and the spit that was turning about with a goose upon it for the king's dinner stood still, and the cook, who was at that moment pulling the kitchen boy by the hair to give him a box on the ear for something he had done amiss, let him go, and both fell asleep. Oh, thank God for that. I get that in medieval times, this is kind of normal, but this is, borderline. The butler, who was slyly tasting the ale, fell asleep with a jug at his lips, and thus everything stood still and slept soundly. A large hedge of thorns soon grew around the palace, and every year it became higher and thicker, till at last the old palace was surrounded and hidden, so that not even the roof or the chimney could be seen. But there went a report through all the lands of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for so the king's daughter was called, so that from time to time several kings' sons came and tried to break through the thicket into the palace. This, however, none of them could ever do, for the thorns and the bushes laid hold of them, as it were, with hands, and they struck fast and died wretchedly. After many, many years of the thicket of thorns, and how a beautiful palace stood behind it, and how a wonderful princess called Briar Rose lay in it asleep with all her court, he told too how he had heard from his grandfather that many, many princes had come and had tried to break through the thicket, but they had all struck fast in it and died. Then the young prince said, "All this shall not frighten me. I will go and see this Briar Rose." The old man tried to hinder him, but he was bent upon going. Now that very day the 100-years were ended, and as the prince came to the thicket, he saw nothing but beautiful flowering shrubs. through which he went with ease, and they shut in after him as thick as ever. Then he came at last to the palace, and there in the crowd court lay the dogs asleep, and the horses were standing in the stables, and on the roof sat the pigeons fast asleep, with their heads under their wings. And when he came into the palace, the flies were sleeping on the walls, the sprite was standing still, the butler had a jug of ale at his lips, going to drink a draught. The maid sat with a fowl in her lap, ready for it to be plucked, and the cook in the kitchen was still holding up her hand as if she was going to beat the boy. Then he went on still farther, and all was so still that he could hear every breath he drew, till at last he came to the old tower, and opened the door of the little room in which Briar Rose was, and there she lay, fast asleep on a couch by the window. She looked so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off her, so he swooped down and gave her a kiss. But the moment he kissed her, she opened her eyes and awoke, and smiled upon him. And they went out together, and soon the king and queen also awoke, and all the court and gazed up each other with great wonder, and the horses shook themselves, and the dogs jumped up and barked, and the pigeons took their heads from under their wings and looked about and flew into the fields. The flies on the wall buzzed again, the fire in the kitchen blazed up, round went the jug, and round went the spite, with the goose for the king's dinner upon it. The butler finished his draught of ale, the maid went on plucking the fowl, and the cook gave the boy a box on his ear. And then the prince and Briar Rose were married, and the wedding feast was given, and they lived happily ever after, all their lives long. Well, that was the first story we read together. I'm going to take a sip of water. So what do y'all think? I personally didn't think it was that bad. I was kind of worried because I knew there was an older version of the story, which didn't end so good with the prince, or well, king in that case, having his way with her sleeping body and getting her pregnant twice. I am very thankful that this is not that story. Oh, okay. I guess the Brothers Grimm wasn't as dark as I thought it would be. Okay, so that's Sleeping Beauty done. Okay, next up is Rapunzel. And let me just go to that page on the PDF. And take another sip of water because I don't usually speak this much out loud or at all. I'm normally not. I'm usually the person who listens instead of the person who talks. So I think I'm gonna lose my voice after this. Ha ha ha. Okay. Rapunzel. There were once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length, the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window at the back of their house from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to go into it because it belonged to an enchantress who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day, the woman was standing by this window and looked down into the garden. when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful Rapunzel, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it. She quite pined away and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed and asked, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I could only eat some of that rampion which is in the garden beyond our house, I shall die." The man who loved her thought, "Sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of the rampion yourself, let it cost what it will." At twilight, he climbed down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion, and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it, and ate it greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of the evening, therefore, he let himself down again, but when he climbed down the wall, he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How can you dare," she said with an angry look, "descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You shall suffer for it." "Ah," he answered, "let mercy take the place of justice. I only made my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the windows and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not gotten some to eat." Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened, and said to him, "If the case be as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will. Only I make one condition. You must give me the child which your wife will bring into the world. It shall be treated well, and I will care for it like a mother." The man, in his terror, consented to everything, and when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in a forest and had neither stairs nor door, but quite at the top was a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them down one of the hooks of the window above, and let her hair fall 20 ells down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. You know, I have pretty long hair myself, and it took me 3-4 years to grow it to my waist. I don't think a 12-year-old will get that much hair to go down 20 ilks. And also for your hair to go around one of the hooks, that's gonna hurt so bad. And also it's gonna get caught so often. Well, at least if I ever meet Rapunzel in real life, I'd ask her what's her hair care routine like. After a year or 2, it came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. Then he heard a song, which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed her time by letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her, and looked for a door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing was so deeply touched his heart that every day he rode out into the forest and listened to it. Once, when he was standing behind a tree, he saw an enchantress hang there, and he heard how she cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If that is the ladder by which one mounts, I too will try my fortune," he said, and next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Immediately the hair fell down and the king's son climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man, such as her eyes had never yet beheld, came to her. But the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been stirring, that it had left him would have no rest, and was forced to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "He will love me more than old Dame Gothel does." And she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said, "I will willingly go down with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a sealskin of silk every time you come, and I will weave a ladder with it. And when that is ready, I will descend, and you will take me on your horse." They agreed that until that time he should come to her every evening, for the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this evening until once Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment." "Ah, you wicked child!" cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her anger, she clutched Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, wrapped them twice around her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with the right, and snip, snip. They were cut off, and the lovely braids laid on the ground. And she was so pitiful that she took poor Rapunzel into the desert, where she had to live in great grief and misery. You know, I get why you'd be mad that your child wouldn't tell you about their significant other, and also Rapunzel, I know this is back in the past, but please don't fall for the first man you see. But also, that's a little much. That's a little much. On the same day that she cast at Rapunzel, however, the enchantress fastened the braid of hair, which she had cut off, to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me," she let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and venomous looks. "Aha!" she cried mockingly. "You would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest. That cat hath got it, and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her again." The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. He wandered quite blind about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did not deny but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at length came to the desert where Rapunzel, with the twins at which he had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it. And when he approached, Rapunzel knew him, and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears welted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards happily and content. Well, this all could have been avoided if Rapunzel didn't slip her tongue and tell Gothel about the prince. But I'm glad that they got together again, even if I think 15 years old is way too young to have twins. Way too young. Okay, that's Rapunzel done. I'm sorry, I'm like I said before, I'm really not used to speaking this much. I'm sorry if I slowly get more and more, my voice slowly gets softer and softer as we go through. Okay, I think after this next one, Hansel and Gretel, I'm going to stop it there. I'll leave Little Red Riding Hood for next week. Let me just jump to the page. Let's see how long this one is. Okay, it's not that bad, but 6 pages, give or take. Okay. Hansel and Gretel. Hard by a great forest dwelled a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once when great dearth fell on the land, he could no longer procure even daily bread. Now when he thought over this by night in his bed and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, "What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest. We will light a fire for them and give them each one more piece of bread, and then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I will not do that. How could I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals will soon come and tear them to pieces." "Oh, you fool," she said. "Then we must all 4 die of hunger. You may as well plan the pikes of our coffins." And she left him no peace until he consented. "But I feel very sorry for the poor children all the same," said the man. The 2 children had not been able to fall asleep for hunger, and heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears, and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress yourself. I will soon find a way to help us." And when the old folks had fallen asleep, he got up and put on his little coat and opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles which lay in the front of the house glistened like real silver pennies. Hansel stooped and stuffed the little pocket of his coat with as many as he could get in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." And he lay down again in his bed. When day dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you sluggards. We are going to the forest to fetch wood." She gave them each a little piece of bread and said, "There is something for your dinner. but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel took the bread under her apron, and Gretel had the pebbles in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Gretel stood still and peeked back at the house and did so again and again. His father said, "Hansel, what are you looking at there and staying behind for? Pay attention and do not forget how you use your legs." "Ah, father," said Hansel, "I was looking at my little white cat, which has been sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me." The wife said, "Fool, that is not your little cat. That is the morning sun which is shining on the chimney." Hansel, however, had not been looking back at their cat, but had been constantly throwing one of the white pebble stones out of his pocket on the road. When they reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire, that you may not be cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together, as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighter, and when the fire was burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourself down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood. When we have done, we will come back and fetch you away." I'm going to take a small break to drink some water. Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of the bread. And as they heard the stroke of the wood axe, they believed that their father was near. But it was not the axe, however, but a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree, which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards. And that as they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes closed with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they awoke, it was already dark. Gretel began to cry, and said, "How are we to get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her, and said, "Just wait a little, until the moon has risen, and then we'll soon find the way." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and followed the pebbles which shone like newly coined silver pieces, and showed them the way. They walked the whole night, and by the break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." The father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind alone. Not enough to say no to his wife, apparently. Anyway, not long after, there was once more great drought throughout the lands, and the children heard their mother saying at night to their father, "Everything is eaten again. We have one loaf of bread left, one half loaf left. And that is the end. The children must go. We will take them further into the woods, so that they will not find their way out again. There is no other means for saving ourselves." The man's heart was heavy, and he thought, "It would be better for you to share the last mouthful with your children." The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded him and reproached him. "He who says A must say B, otherwise, likewise." And as he yielded the first time, he had to do a second time also. The children, however, were still awake and heard the conversation. When the old folks were asleep, Hansel again got up and wanted to look out and pick up pebbles as he'd done before, but the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nonetheless, he comforted his little sister and said, "Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly. The good God will help us." Early in the morning came the woman, and took the children out of their beds. The piece of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground. Hansel, why do you stop and look around? Said the father. Go on. I'm looking back at my little pigeon, which is sitting on the roof, and wants to say goodbye to me, answered Hansel. Hansel, fool, said the woman. That is not your little pigeon, that is the morning sun that is shining on the chimney. Hansel, however, little by little threw all the crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. But a great fire was again made, and the mother said, Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired, you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are done, we will come and fetch you away. When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had scattered his by the way. When they fell asleep and evening passed, but no one came to the poor children. They did not wake until it was dark. And Hansel comforted his little sister and said, Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread I have strewn about. It will show us our way home again. When the moon came, they set out, but found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all up. Hansel said to Gretel, We shall soon find the way, but they did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day too, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest, which grew on and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which grew on the ground. And as they were so weary that their little legs would carry them no longer, they lay down beneath the tree and fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always came deeper into the forest, and if help did not come soon, they must die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a spot, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. When its song was over, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house. On the roof, which it alighted, and when they approached the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cake, but that the window was clear sugar. We shall set to work on that, said Hansel, and have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, can eat a bit of the windows. It will taste sweet. Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel leaned against the window and nibbled at the panels. Then a soft voice cried from the parlor, Nibble, nibble, gnaw, who is nibbling at my little house? The children answered, The wind, the heaven-born wind, and went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who liked the taste of the roof, tore down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane and sat down and enjoyed herself with it. Suddenly, the door opened, and a woman as old as the hills, who supported herself on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? You come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you. Do not follow creepy people to the houses. Please don't follow people home. She took them both by the hand and led them into her house. Then good food was set before them, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples, and nuts. After two pretty little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them, and they thought they were in heaven. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was, in reality, a wicked witch, who lay in wait for children and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she killed it, cooked, and ate it. And that was a feast day with her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen sense like the beasts, and are aware when beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed with malice and said mockingly, "I have them. They shall not escape me again." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty with their plump and rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand and carried her into a little stable and locked him in behind a grated door. Scream as she might, it will not help him. Then she went to Gretel and shook her till she awake and cried, "Get up, lazy thing! Fetch some water and cook something good for your brother. He is in the stable outside and is to be made fat. When he is fat, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain, but she was forced to do what the wicked witch commanded. Now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Each morning the woman crept into the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stick out your finger so that I may feel if you will soon be fat." Hansel, however, stuck out a little bone to her, and the old woman, who had dim eyes, could not see and thought it was Hansel's finger, and was astonished that there was no way to fatten him. When 4 weeks had gone by and Hansel still remained thin, she was seized with impatience and could not wait any longer. "Now then, Gretel," she cried to the girl, "stir yourself and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean. Tomorrow I will kill him and cook him." Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow from her cheeks. "Dear God, do help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forest had but devoured us, we should at any rate have died together." "Just keep your noise to yourself," said the old woman. "It will not help you at all." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang out the cauldron with the water and light a fire. "We will bake first," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and knead the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, and from which flames of fire were already darting. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly heated so that we can put the bread in." And once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then she would eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in mind and said, "I do not know how I am to do it. How do I get in?" "Silly goose," said the old woman. "The door is big enough. Just look, I can get in myself." And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a push that drove her far into it and shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. Oh, she had begun to howl horribly, but Gretel ran away, and the godless witch was miserably burnt to death. Gretel, however, ran like lightning to Hansel, opening his little stable and cried, "Hansel, we are saved! The old witch is dead!" Then Hansel sprung like a bird from his cage when the door was opened. How they did rejoice and embrace each other and dance about and kiss each other. And as they had no longer need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chest full of pearls and jewels. There are far better ways than pebbles. These are far better than pebbles, said Hansel, and thrust in his pocket whatever he could get in. And Gretel said, I too shall take something home with me, and filled her pinafore full. But now we must be off, said Hansel, that we may get out of the witch's forest. When they had walked for about 2 hours, they came to a great stretch of water. We cannot cross, said Hansel. I see no footplant and no bridge, and there is no ferry, answered Gretel, but a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over. Then she cried, Little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or a bridge in sight. Take us across thy back so white. The duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on its back and told his sister to sit by him. No, replied Gretel. There will be too heavy for the little duck. She shall take us across, one after the other. The good little duck did so, and when they were safely crossed and walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. They began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves around their father's neck. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. The woman, however, was dead. Gretel emptied her pinafore until pearls and precious stones fell about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pockets to add to them. And all anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. My tale is done. There runs a mouse. Whoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it. The end. And that was Hansel and Gretel. I need more water. I think I was a little too ambitious about the 1 hour, 90 minutes and 2 hour stream. I think I will cut my expectation down to 1 hour to 60 minutes to a 90-minute stream instead. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the 3 stories that I had planned. And I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.